And gentlemen, before Malcolm comes in, just doing last minute housekeeping to set up. And sometimes it's not easy to tell when it becomes live, which is a little bit scary. I have to remind myself not to do something like pick my nose. And gentlemen, before Malcolm comes in, just yeah, and here we go. So let's make sure the sound of the playback's off and put this in. Make sure it's on my blog as well as live streaming on YouTube. So it's pretty much everywhere. And yes, there we go. But thank you for those of you watching. Thank you for joining. And or if you're not watching live and watching a playback, then thank you for coming along. This is the first time I've been involved, not in the live stream discussion on James Bond. I've done that already. I did a discussion with Dr. Lisa Funnell a few months back at the end of last year on some of the actors in the Bond films who tragically left us in 2020, not least Sean Connery. And this time, this is the first time actually discussing a Bond film. Before we even go any further, I do want to apologise. I am for my hair, which I can kind of see is a little bit, and that's basically because I haven't been to the barbers because they're not open because we're in a lockdown, which is all well and good. But I think I'm sort of getting the Michael Heseltine look. And for those of you who don't know Michael Heseltine is, he was the politician who brought down Margaret Thatcher and was John Major's deputy, especially in the latter years of his premiership. So Michael Heseltine was sort of known as Tarzan. He had this long mane of blonde hair. Well, not long, but it was sort of all heavy in front, as it were. So I probably got that. And Malcolm is joining us. And here he is. Hang on. And good evening, Mr. Man. We've been expecting you.
Good evening.
Let me show you around my humble abode. All my plans before something horrible happens. How are you anyway?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm all right. I was frantically writing notes because, like you, I've never done, as I was just saying to our viewers, I've done a live stream discussion on Bond before, but not a particular Bond film. And in spite of watching all those videos that Joe Darlington and David Zawitsky and Kelvin Dyson all do on Bond films, I do feel a bit like a novice on this.
You and both.
But we'll crack it like you cracked on. We'll crack on, and we've written notes, and we'll try and make this as comprehensive as possible.
Sure.
Now, it was you, Malcolm, who chose License to Kill.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
I get the impression this is among your top 5 Bond films.
It's number one. Absolutely number one. Despite stiff competition from GoldenEye and the new Casino Royale.
Yes.
I think because it was the first Bond film I think I saw in the cinema. So it goes back to childhood, or at least to, I was, 18 or 19 in 1989. And so it made a big impression seeing it on the big screen. Yeah. And there's so much about it that just matches my ideal types of character, heroes, villains as well. I can go into further detail if you like there.
Oh, we will touch on all of that later on.
Okay.
It was, for me, The Living Daylights was the first one I saw at the cinema.
Right, the one before.
License to Kill, because I was just underage for that. As you know, there was a 15 certificate. But I mean, as soon as, things were allowed, I suppose, able, I read the book, the novelization of the film by John Gardner and saw the film video, but it's License to Kill is not in my top 5. But and I've been thinking about this. It's not a film I hate. It's not a film I dislike. It's not a film I dislike, not by a long shot. But it's not even among my top 10 Bond films. And I was thinking about this because my feelings about it are twofold. And I think what it boils down to is the things I like about it aren't necessarily, some of it's Bondian and some of it isn't. I like it as the film it is, but part of my problem is it doesn't. I think we see so much of the same formula in a lot of Bond films, even in the Daniel Craig ones, which try its best to break some of it.
Yeah,
this kind of breaks the formula more than perhaps any other Bond film, even though you see some of the Bond elements in there. And what would you say to that?
I'd agree entirely. I mean, my Bond knowledge is by no means comprehensive, but I don't recall him rebelling from MI6 in any previous film.
No.
And Dalton, of course, brings the grittier Bond to the screen, as they say, the one closer to Ian Fleming's in the books. So it breaks the film convention rather than the book convention there.
Yeah.
In Sanchez, I think he's a very different villain to others. He's less fantastical in previous films, at least the ones I remember. So it's more real. It's more grounded in reality. Now, I have to say, I watched the film because I hadn't seen it in an awful long time before tonight. And I watched the commentary as well. And also another podcast with the Really 007 podcast with Anthony Stark. So if anyone watches and thinks I heard that on there, then I apologize in advance. But they were all excellent. So yeah, it's grounded more in reality than any of the ones previous. Out of honesty, I have to exclude The Living Daylights because, again, I haven't seen that for an awful long time and I don't remember that much about it. So how they approached Bond beyond some basics in that film, that I'm not sure about. But yeah, that's why I think it's different. It's grounded in a different way than the other pictures, and the characters are approached differently as well, hero and villain alike, and even the Bond girls. You would hesitate to call Ms. Kennedy a Bond girl. Lupa, who complains about these men, why can't they get along? When feminism is somehow making an appearance or its entry into the Bond world. So, the Bond girls, even they are approached differently. So, yeah, those are some principal ways in which I think it's different to previous films.
Yeah, Miss Kennedy was the pseudonym Bond gave Pam Bouvier when she posed as his secretary.
That's right. Yeah. She says that in a very pointed way.
Yeah.
So you don't forget it. It's not glossed over.
And she wasn't happy. I mean, I remember at the time, I noticed the connection at the time because Jackie Kennedy's maiden name was Bouvier.
Bouvier, that's right. Yeah.
It was clearly, a play on that not many people know that, or those who didn't know that, Bond was sort of making a Kennedy-esque reference, and I get the impression from watching that she got it immediately and was not impressed.
Yes. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, you're quite right. Bouvier, it's very elusive, but yeah, still there. It's a neat touch. Yeah, it's a nice touch.
But where was it? She is, I think, one of the Bond girls I particularly like. I mean, I don't dislike any of them, but I always prefer the more gutsier ones, and she's definitely one of the more gutsier ones.
She is. She's a proto Xenia Ronatop. The strength of her character. if nothing else.
Yes, I would rather spend it, if I had a choice between going out with a meal with friends and joining us is Pam Bouvier, or going out for a meal with friends and joining us is Xenia Onatop, I think I prefer Pam Bouvier.
Yeah, absolutely. But what I mean is that when you look at the Bond girls of the past, as much as goes back to the podcast that I listened to, watched, Daniel Craig comes to us via Timothy Dalton. Xenia Onatop, the type of the strong character she is, comes to us via Pam Bouvier or Carrie Lowell's character. It's almost a new bloodline, a new line of character types that they introduce. There are strong women before, but I think not in quite the way that these two are. No. Maybe uniquely. Thinking about some of the Bond women since then.
Yeah.
I bow to better judgment, but I can't think of any that are quite as strong as they are. Certainly Xenia Onatop. I don't think there's any character been like her since.
She always did enjoy a good squeeze, did Xenia?
She certainly did, and we're not talking about archaeology here either. That's wonderful, the archaeology fans out there.
But we did, I mean, the thing about Xenia, I mean, there were Bond femme fatales, ones resolutely bad, like Fiona Volpe and Thunderball, and her alter ego Fatima Blush in Never Say Never Again. And of course there was
Can we count that one?
Sorry?
Can we count that one since it's not
canon?
Canon.
Someone's asked me about Never Say Never Again. Do I regard it as canon?
Okay.
The only way it and the answer that came immediately to mind, and I never thought about it, it was just an answer I didn't stop to think, that I tend to regard, imagine the Bond films, all 24 of them, are the many children of a 17th century monarch.
Okay.
This is the only way I can describe it. It's not a good analogy, I promise you, but this is the best way I can describe it.
Right.
Never Say Never Again's the acknowledged illegitimate child.
Oh, I see what you've done there. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. But yeah.
I don't quite regard this 1967 version of Casino Royale in that same light, because it's just so bonkers.
I've never watched it. I've never
watched it. First time I saw it out of a sense of curiosity.
Right.
Especially with the huge cast.
Right.
All-star casting. And I knew it was a comedy version of Bond, but oh my goodness, it makes Austin Powers look... I think they tried to, when they initially planned that version of Casino Royale, they were thinking of the very sort of thing Mike Myers did in sort of the human stuff, but I think it's such a mess, and that's a discussion all on its own.
Sure.
I'll happily discuss for hours, but it is, if I had a choice between the 1967 version of Casino Royale and License to Kill, I'd prefer License to Kill every time. But it has a lot of, I mean, whilst I have problems seeing it in the context being a Bond film. You did touch on the Fleming-esque bit, which I wanted to say. In terms of if License to Kill does anything, and I realised this evening, it exposes what we know already into broad daylight, that there is a difference between what we expect in the James Bond fiction by Ian Fleming and what we expect in the James Bond films, and that they are two very different things. And License to Kill is perhaps a bit more leaning towards the Fleming novels than to the formula we see in the films.
Yes, it acts like a bridge between the movie Bond and book Bond, for sure. That's so many ways. Geographically, the whole thing is set in one particular place. One or two of the books are like that as well. Yeah, it says perhaps a lot about audience expectation that it failed at the cinema.
Yeah.
Criminally failed. Well, perhaps no wonder, because for 30 odd years, they'd had a very different vision of Bond. They weren't quite ready for the books on the big screen, unusually.
Yeah.
But that I'm always in when it comes to movie adaptations or television adaptations of books. I want no more and less than that they're faithful to what the author intended, and I think this film comes closer to that than any of the others, especially Roger Moore films or the later ones.
Yeah.
But yeah, audiences were not quite so sure at the time. But yeah, it's a good point. It is a good bridge, and it's interesting that with Daniel Craig, we've kind of gone across that bridge again, or recreated it. This time, it's really worked out well for them. It's been an absolute success from the start.
Yeah.
But lots of reasons for that, I imagine.
I think it part of the problem was it was such a Timothy Dalton is such a contrast to Roger Moore. I think people had enough of the Moore era when it ended, but I think they weren't quite ready for Dalton.
Yeah.
And License to Kill is such. They were clear because I mean The Living Daylights did better at the box office than A View to a Kill, so I think people were ready for a new look Bond, but not perhaps to that degree.
Yeah, yeah.
With License to Kill, it also that summer Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was at the cinema at the same time, so there was perhaps the competition that Bond doesn't normally face.
Yeah, and there were other big films around at the same time as well. And I wonder if one of its big problems was it was narratively slightly unbalanced between the serious and the humor. It's unrealistic to expect audiences who had grown up with Roger Moore, because he had been Bond, for a generation. It was over 10 years, wasn't it, before he finally signed off.
Yeah, he was the first Bond I knew of, because his films were already coming out. There used to be a bit of a gap, and his films were already coming out on television.
Right, yeah.
So I remember when A View to a Kill came out, and it was part of me, I think, was the shock that they were still being churned out, and it was still Roger Moore.
Yeah.
Like a last hurrah, but I mean, he was in it for a while, and part of the excitement of Dalton coming along was, I mean, George Lazenby aside, wow, this is the first time we're seeing someone play Bond who isn't Connery and who isn't Moore.
Yeah, and in a really unfamiliar way, the lack of humour in him. The best lines, the wittiest lines in the film go to Sanchez rather than Bond. He has one or two, but that's literally it.
Well,
I think it's a lot to ask of cinema audiences to swing that pendulum from one way to the other in so much in one picture, or even two pictures. Makes me wonder how Daniel Craig got away with it, but then it's a different era, different things at play.
I think there were several factors that were lacking in the run up to Dalton that were there in the run up to Craig, and how they introduced Bond. I mean, also, I think if they'd have done something like GoldenEye after The Living Daylights, and then License to Kill.
Yeah, that would have worked.
Yeah, and I could just about see Dalton in GoldenEye, but I think part of that is how when the first drafts of GoldenEye were written, Dalton was still very much James Bond, contractually at least.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting point. Bond is a bit brighter. They learnt their lesson for GoldenEye, but I mean, it would not have taken a big rewrite to darken it somewhat for Dalton's Bond, or to make it a bridge between Living Daylights and then License to Kill at the other end. It's rather a shame they didn't do that, but I guess by then he was too old for the role. So understandably, they moved on.
Yeah. Could you imagine Dalton in the Brosnan era? Let's imagine that Dalton decided to continue, and his last Bond film was Die Another Day.
If age wasn't an issue, if age wasn't an issue, of course he would have carried on.
Would have been
those particular stories I'm not so sure about, particularly as Brosnan moves on and on. You could never imagine Timothy Dalton handling an invisible car, for example. That's going right back to Roger Moore days. However, the North Korea storyline, I think Dalton would have been great for that. Brosnan was only moody as long as he had that big beard, and then he's Brosnan again.
The World Is Not Enough would have been a bit of a Dalton-esque film as well, wouldn't it? The themes of betrayal and...
Now you have to remind me, is that the one with... no.
That's the one where...
Elliot Carver.
No, that's Tomorrow Never Dies. The World
okay, sorry.
Set in Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan and Turkey. And it's about an oil pipeline owned by Electra King, who thinks the only time the main Bond villain is a woman.
Right.
Played by Sophie Marceau. So yeah, I think
the idea of the betrayal, Alec Trevelyan's betrayal, that would have been Dalton would have nailed that one. I'm absolutely sure of it. The heaviness of that plot line, he would have been perfect for that.
There were two Bond villains I would have loved to have seen Dalton's Bond against. One is the Max Zorin from View to a Kill, and the other is Alec Trevelyan in GoldenEye. Dalton's Bond against either of those, I would have very much enjoyed watching.
I think with Zorin, for Walken would have had to have brought an extra dimension to that role. With Roger Moore, he just needs to turn up and chew up the furniture like a madman, and bang, he's brilliant. And that's what he does. And yeah, he's a great villain in it. Like a lot of Bond villains, chief villains and sub-villains, you think, his backstory would have been really good. It'd been great having a film or a book about him. But he's too shallow for Dalton, for Timothy Dalton. Alec Trevelyan brings that depth, or the writers of GoldenEye bring the depth that they need to match Dalton's Bond. That's something ever so important, because it's awful when the villains are too OP, as they say, too powerful, or the hero is. My case in point is No Country for Old Men, where the villain there is so much more superior to all the hero characters or the protagonists, that it's just, I can't stand it because of that. I have to say, slightly controversial view, a friend of mine who loves the film thinks I'm absolutely wrong, but Zorin would have needed to have, they would have, I think, would have needed to have gone into more his KGB background, brought more of that to the surface to make it work, but it could have done, because again, he's like Truman Lodge on steroids, that character. The great businessman.
Are you on steroids? I interrupt.
Truman Lodge.
Oh yes.
So he
strikes me as Michael J. Fox gone bad.
Absolutely, yeah, that's true. He's a great character, corrupt to the bone, but Anthony Stark brings a lot to him. But he's almost the son or the grandson of Zorin in terms of the kind of person he is. If they had, Dalton and Zorin could have worked, but it would have needed rewriting. And Trevelyan would have been perfect just as he was, I think. He's such a good villain. I think him and Sanchez, favorite villains of mine. Most memorable for me.
I actually did a while ago, because of all these Bond stuff going around that I've sort of got in lockdown. I did a list of favorite Bond villains as to who was my least favorite and who wasn't, and it was a bit difficult to sort of work out who is who.
Right.
I even think even did. Oh, here we are. And he is definitely 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, he's in my top 10. Franz Sanchez. He's always scared me. My favorite Bond villains are always the ones who, if I were in a room with them, I would literally be quietly fearing for my life. And
I'd be trying to ingratiate myself with him,
sorry?
just to save my life. I'd be trying to ingratiate myself with him.
Yeah, but for me, Sanchez is up there alongside Zorin, Scaramanga, Blofeld, apart from Charles Grey, Hugo Drax, Le Chiffre, Rosa Klebb. These are, for me, very terrifying in different ways, Bond villains.
Well, I think the reason why Sanchez is so terrifying is that he's so real. He is out there right now in a drug baron or a drug baron, an arms dealer, perhaps. I don't know. Certainly in Central or South America or
money laundering,
the Russian government or something. Whoever is ordering poisonings, someone like him is out there. He exists. Whereas Scaramanga, you couldn't imagine.
Well, Scaramanga's just a hit. Scaramanga's a hitman who just happens to almost stumble onto having ownership of this Solex, which gives him an unimaginable leverage in the energy crisis that took place at the time. That was one of the few times the real world politics got into the Bond films.
Until Daniel Craig came along, yeah.
Yes, till Daniel
Craig. And Sanchez, because he's based on Pablo Escobar. Or those kind of people.
And Sanchez, terrified me from the word go. The first scene you see him, when he goes to American airspace and he claims back Lupa Lamoy, who clearly felt, understandably, she was safe in the US. Yeah. And they barge in, and the first thing he says, did he promise you his heart? And then says to his aides, they're dragging him, give her his heart. Yeah. You just you know from the look at it, he isn't messing around, and they will literally give him an agonizing death for it. And
he has the perfect sidekick, if you could call him that, or protege, more likely, in Dario.
Oh yeah.
And the way he flicks the knife out is so good, so evil. His arm goes stiff. It's like it becomes. He's got
the eyes.
Knife. Yeah, the eyes, the whole face. He's got a little pocket knife. Yeah. Well, that's not very frightening. Dundee guy has got this big machete, but then the way he stiffens his arm, it's like the knife suddenly grows in size according to how menacing that character is. This long hilt of his arm. It's a brilliant opening scene. The way it goes from this narco bust, which you'd see in any number of films in the 80s.
Yes.
And afterwards, and then into very classic Bond territory for perhaps the first and last time, when Bond and Leiter jump out of their helicopters to get to the wedding.
Yes.
It's a dynamite scene. It's really, really powerful.
Yeah.
Give him his heart. Yeah.
And no wonder Benicio del Toro went on to greater success. But with the other thing is the two elements from the Fleming novels that went straight into License to Kill. One is they're three tiny. There's a third tiny element, but Bond's marriage is briefly referred to.
Yeah,
which is the obvious reason. It's the setup before Felix's wife is killed.
Yeah.
And it's the only time you see Dalton's Bond, for all his brutalness, shows a great deal of vulnerability in this film, and that's one of those moments is when he is reminded that he loved and lost.
That scene at the beginning. You're quite right. Incredibly vulnerable moment, the likes of which perhaps we don't see until Daniel Craig in the shower with Vesper Lind.
Yes, when she's all hunched up.
I love that scene. A great moment of intimacy and vulnerability between them. and
they're
no
both
violence
really
or sex
clothed.
involved.
Those who I has to add, it's not the intimacy you would expect in a shower scene. It's
no,
yeah.
Emotional intimacy rather than sexual. But I was very struck, really struck, when I watched the film the other day, License to Kill the other day, at the end. So Bond goes on this mission to get revenge on Sanchez, finally accomplishes his aim, and then he's almost in tears.
I was going to I noticed that as well.
Yeah,
See him, the way he just sits down and his face starts to crumple just before. Yeah.
And what's he thinking? Is it, it's finally over, or was it worth it?
Yeah.
That stuck with me. And I think if I forget all the other scenes in the film, that'll be one scene that I will not forget, because it's so unusual for Bond picture, up till Daniel Craig, to have that. It's beautiful in its way. It's great that they allowed Bond to be vulnerable, and they picked the perfect moment, and he portrayed that vulnerability ever so well. Really striking. Yeah.
The other two bits I was mentioning, one is obviously what happens to Felix. That comes from the novel Live and Let Die. Although in that case he's keel-hauled, which you get from was later replicated for yours only, and that's when the shark takes. That's from the novel Live and Let Die. But also Fleming, when the first collection of Bond short stories by Ian Fleming. And the last one, the Hildebrand Rarity, is when Bond finds himself on a fishing trip with on a ship called on a yacht or boat called the Wave Crest. And the nastiness of Milton Crest, and I think he badly treats his wife or his mistress in the same way Sanchez treats Leaving the Wall.
That's a scene that's always stayed with me since I first watched it. The fact that he whips her, and the Bond villains are always vile and horrible and violent people, but there's something about that, having the whip and seeing the damage, the wounds on her back, that brings home his wickedness much more strongly than having a base with missiles in space or wherever else. It brings home his evilness much more.
But what brings it, and this is why I think makes him amongst some of the most, the Bond villains are mentioned, this is partly why I find them so frightening, is I once actually put forward an argument that a lot of Bond villains are actually nice people. And I need to explain this because
you think you do,
because people are going to think, oh my goodness, being a nice person does not mean being kind. Being a nice person does not mean you're not a sociopath. I mean, in many ways, they're very nice. They invite, to use the stereotypes that are around Bond films, they're pleased to see Bond when he turns up a bit disheveled. Sometimes they give him a lovely large meal. They show him around their house or their headquarters, whatever. And not only that, they swear to it, they tell all their plans. I mean, admittedly, they aim to give him a horrible death that he can easily get out of. Well, perhaps not so. But by and large, they're quite charming towards him. And we see a lot of charm in Sanchez. When Bond is, for a lot of the film, he sees Bond as an ally because that's how Bond poses as. And you can see he trusts Bond. Which adds to the agony of it all. But you know what a monster he is. But it's the bit. Sorry, I did something silly there, and I do apologise. I meant to put to the side and some video DVD cassettes fell.
No problem.
It's Sherlock Holmes, the Beatles anthology, and they were safe and sound. When he rescues Bond from British intelligence, you know what I mean? And he's very solicitous, almost maternal-like. Milk, sugar, coffee. And he's trying to pry information out of Bond. So there's still that slight lack of trust. He's so charming and so showing great concern.
I would absolutely agree in regards to Sanchez. He makes the point in the film He's a man for whom loyalty matters. So if you're loyal to him, he'll treat you well. I mean, okay, that's not a high bar, perhaps, the kind of his moral nature, but it's better than being someone who uses people, hates everyone, dislikes everyone. He doesn't dislike everyone. His loyalty may go no further than you doing what he wants you to do, but he allows people to talk back to him, I suppose. And he's got this relationship with Dario that goes beyond merely the mob boss or drug lord and the hoodlum. It's, I think, basically paternalistic, although you could look at it, if one wanted, as almost homoerotic, the way he touches him once or twice. But I imagine being Central American culture, it's more a paternal attitude. So he's got that, and he doesn't need to be showing that kind of sensitivity towards one of his henchmen, but he clearly likes Dario.
At the moment, it's similar. Sanchez. I mean, that's something else. Did you watch The Night Manager a few years ago?
I did not. No.
People were making comparisons between that and License to Kill. The hero of the piece having to go inside the world of an arms dealer, and there were similarities between Bond going into the world of Sanchez.
Yeah.
And there's a scene where Richard Roper, played by Hugh Laurie, who does it brilliantly. He does it with Hugh. You know how Hugh Laurie is with a transatlantic accent, and he does that, and he's all very charming. And there's a scene where, because he's growing to trust this, but he says to our hero, whose name momentarily forgotten, he puts out and says, "You step out of line, I will make you howl for your mother." And it's chilling.
Yeah.
Because you know that. And you see what he does to the henchman when he thinks they've stepped out of line. When he assumes wrongly that Milton Crest has stolen money from him, into the air pressure thing and the whole, very grim.
Yeah.
And then Truman Lodge, who now, in the midst of doesn't trust. It's when he says, when Truman Lodge has got his suitcase under his arm and he's running away from all the explosions and.
I think that's more an act of petulance, because Truman Lodge is just gassing on about, "Oh, now look what you've done, brilliant! Well, look all this money, or let's cut overheads." Another great line.
Yeah.
And the laundering one, brilliant line.
Yeah.
Milton Crest.
But before that, when when the explosions are happening all around the headquarters, in the temple facade and
when they leave.
When they're running away, and he's got a satchel or suitcase under his arm, and he's running like that, and a car stops in front of it. Sanchez goes in, "You come with me."
Yeah.
You feel that the blood slightly drain from your face, even when the first time you see it, when you're not aware that he is in danger. But yeah, I think
I never got that Truman Lodge, he might be planning to kill him anyway.
I don't think he would have
quite relieved to be rescued.
I don't think Truman Lodge would have planned to kill Sanchez. I think he would have.
He would have run.
I think Bond would have said about Truman. What about Truman Lodge? I think if Sanchez, I would need to look in great detail again.
Yeah.
But I think if Sanchez suspected Truman Lodge of anything, it would be skimming money off the profit. So, but he didn't kill him out. So I think part of it was irritation. Hence, it's probably time to cut overheads.
Yeah.
And then, but I remember the first time I saw him kill Truman Lodge, I was like, and Hella with the stingers, and he's very brutal.
That was
one villain.
That kind of surprised me again. That happened so quickly. The setup, making Hella or Bond poisoning Sanchez's mind against Hella, and then his death. It happened so quickly, or for me, a bit too quickly.
Yes.
As opposed to, I suppose, Milton Crest, where it's a slower build-up. You get time, or I felt I had more time to get into that storyline, whereas Hella 1 minute he's there being perfectly loyal, and it's just that one scene where he's with the missiles that does him, and then he's dead. For my liking, that was a bit too quick, but I mean, they could hardly span it out at that stage of the story. But yeah, he got his just desserts. Unlike, I have to say, poor Sharky. That was the one thing I did not like about the film, that Sharky got killed. So I felt it was almost gratuitous, just so they could make a joke about his name.
Narratively, he'd fulfilled his purpose, though.
Well, he fulfills his purpose.
I agree with you about
just go back to what he was doing.
Yeah,
I thought. I didn't think there was a good enough reason to kill him off. It didn't add anything to the story.
No.
And for me, it takes away from it a little.
I agree with you that I think what I was trying to say is, I think that was the point. He should have left the narrative. It just would have been better had it been a different way. But it did show Bond. Equally, you could argue Bond lost his temper at that moment, and he behaved very recklessly in those next few minutes. He goes out, he shoots the captain with a spear gun, dives into the water in full view of everyone else. Whilst he's swimming around, they're still looking for him. He does the very thing he shouldn't be doing if he doesn't want to be found, and that is discover the underwater the case underwater of all the cocaine, and and he opens it and he starts stabbing away, and then the camera comes up and he stabs that. Well, now he's out in the open because now they've put him in, and he very nearly gets killed for his recklessness. And if it wasn't for the fact that he could see the plane, the waterplane sort of going over there, and he got the spear gun, and that he had aimed accurately, in fact, that he would have been a dead man. So
this is earlier on, isn't it? Before Sharky gets killed.
No, after Sharky gets killed.
No, Sharky gets killed a bit later. This is really early.
When Bond nearly drowns after they surround him and they cut the. That's what I'm referring to.
Right, but no, the stabbing of the cocaine.
No, that happens after Sharky.
Does it?
Yeah, because he's in Lupe's cabin.
Okay.
And then he hears noise and he looks out the window and says, "Hey, yes, and guess what? His name was Sharky."
Yeah. Okay. Well. Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Still, it allows for the underwater sequences. Anyway, allow for great Bond moments with the skiing on the water without water skis. Which is a great scene, and hijacking the airplane. Good moments.
The water skiing is incredible. I mean, Kelvin Dyson has said the same on one of his videos, but it's true. I mean, I did water skiing once. I was on one of those school trips, and I couldn't do it. The moment it went off, my head was going face down underwater at about 30 miles an hour, and I had to let go. So to do that barefoot and to just sort of pivot and turn and move, I mean, it is very much an unsung stunt.
I mean, if nothing else about this film, Bond films in general, they have such great stuntmen and women, I expect. Whoever did the truck on half its wheels at the end, still amazing to watch.
Yes, exactly. And the way he drives it and he keeps it there, and then he slams it down directly on the timing onto the Jeep. But it's there are a lot of heart in mouth moments, like they manage to shoot the tires and Bond has to stop the thing, and then he's almost caught, and they're running towards him, guns, and you're like that. And then, frankly, at that moment, Pam comes over with the crop duster, and lets go of all this dust. But the thing that gets me at the continuity on that is they're still firing. They're still firing the guns later. I would have thought all that dust going into the. I'm no ballistics expert, but
I don't have great gun knowledge. I've never fired one or held one,
so
let alone know how they work on the inside. But I suspect you're right. But I think that's something they've sacrificed for the sake of the story.
Yes.
Much like at the start, the helicopters. The helicopter, they look to be quite low down, so Leiter and Bond can wave to the wedding guests. But then the wide angle shot it's much higher, enabling them to parachute. So
and how did they get Sanchez out safely? Because his plane was hanging upside down like that. So how did they get him to land with him?
I would assume that they just landed the helicopter, and they would have their guns trained on him. And
yes,
then
I mean, the thing would have been
out.
right underneath. The plane would have been right underneath the helicopter. If you notice, once Bond wraps the thing around the rear of the plane, the tail of the plane just goes. So
a miniature version of what happens in the Dark Knight Returns.
Right.
But something like that, you could say, well, they go to a airport, or they call it in,
and you sort of hover over. Yeah.
And they just hover there while they retrieve Sanchez and unclip the aeroplane, and then the helicopter can land separately.
Yes.
So something like that, I would have thought.
One thing we haven't touched on that I think is very important, and it's very important to the film franchise, I think, and that's Q.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just how much we see of Q in this film. How Q gets on with Bond seems to radically change. I mean, there would always be that element of Q being irritated by Bond and Bond playing up to Q. Just as Bond and Moneypenny will always flirt with each other, and Bond will occasionally get such a ticking off from M, they would both leave with mutual resentment. You know, Bond would leave with resentment and M's there. You will always get those elements. They're very important. But there was a sense in the Connery era, him and Q, there was this antipathy. With the Moore era, things were a bit more relaxed, but there was still a certain degree of irritation. From License to Kill onwards, I mean, you do see a sense of respect in Living Dates, but particularly from License to Kill, from that point on, you see this sort of warmth between Bond and Q.
Yeah, I mean, Q's getting on by that point, so I think it's probably the right thing to do to make him more mellow for those films onwards. They've really squeezed everything out of the antipathetic relationship. Now let's make him a bit more mellow and even have a laugh once or twice. So it's great seeing Q somewhere other than his headquarters or the Q department. I didn't like so much the way Bond kept trying to get rid of him, and Pam telling them, go home, several times over. I'm glad they didn't.
It was more of a concern that.
For sure. It's not because he didn't like them, but it'd be nice if he had said, "Okay, come on." I like the funny touch of Q in the field with his sweep, his road sweep, which is actually a walkie-talkie or radio transmitter, and he just throws it away. And he keeps telling Bond, bring it back in one piece. Dude, what have you done? But it's Desmond Llewellyn is always a treat to watch. I looked him up, his entry on Wikipedia afterwards, to see when it was he died, because I thought it was the 2010s. And I was astonished that, actually, no, it's 1999. He was born in 1914. I thought, goodness me, he was much older than I realized. He died much longer ago. But it's a treat seeing him, Uncle Q, for an extended period, which it's great with the new films, seeing the younger Q. Ben Wishaw's get that kind of role as well. In Spectre.
There is with Ben Whishaw and with John Cleese and Die Another Day, you do see a marked mutual respect between Bond and Q that you didn't. I mean, Goldfinger and Thunderball, and so you don't really see that. I mean, Desmond Llewellyn said, and this deliberate, when Goldfinger is his second Bond film. In From Russia with Love, he just goes in. Here's suitcase. Here's what's in. Here's the knife. Here's the 50 gold sovereigns. Here's the gas canister under there. Is that all, sir? Thank you. Yeah, well,
Right.
Done. Goldfinger. And apparently when he did the first day and the first take, he gets up and he goes to shake Bond's hand. The director, Guy Hamilton, says, no, you don't do that. And Desmond Llewellyn took the view, well, he's James Bond. Everyone admires him. And no, you don't like him. He doesn't treat your equipment with respect.
Right.
And then he had this, this is how Q sees Bond.
Yeah.
And you do. And he said, Desmond Llewellyn said, I think in another interview, as much as he liked the actors, it was very easy to be irritated by Sean Connery and Roger Moore, and therefore to translate that, because he found learning lines hard.
Right.
So Connery tended to ad-lib during text by picking things up and examining them, and Desmond Llewellyn would be irritated because that would be like, it was distracting him from what he was doing. It wasn't like, some actors like everything, this is how it goes. Roger Moore liked to play practical jokes, and sometimes he would do stuff like write a swear word on a card when the camera's on Desmond giving his lines. So there would be moments like that where it would be like, oh, for goodness sake, that some of the irritation was real, because in different ways, Connery and then Moore were distracting him. So the irritation was there, but I mean, with the younger Bonds, it did get a bit, somewhat softer, I think.
Yeah, and Dalton's got a bit too much dignity, perhaps, for that kind of well, Connery and Moore perhaps are naughty schoolboys, and he's the schoolmaster trying to keep them in line, or getting irritated when they don't do their work properly. Dalton's not really like that. He's grown up. He has a dignity of his own that perhaps certainly Roger Moore, because he's a more comic or light-hearted Bond, didn't quite have. That's not a criticism of him, just the style of his interpretation. So I'm glad that they showed the two of them in a slightly more friendly light.
Yes. And they did, with Roger Moore, they did have, he would have these kind of quips that were, like the schoolboy quip that can be irritated, which we find funny. But imagine if you're Q, you would be irritated. So, in Few Eyes Only, when the water, you see one glamorous assistant pouring water over this umbrella, and it snaps shut with all these spikes coming out, and Bond turns to Q and goes, "Stinging in the rain."
That's a great line.
Not funny, 007. Oh, I see you put the Lotus back together. And the Lotuses were made by hand at that.
Very good. Very good.
I was looking for an excuse to do my Roger Moore. I could, like anyone else, I can do a very bad Sean Connery impression, but then Mick goes into Pidgin Dutch very quickly.
Oh, right. Okay.
But Roger Moore is one of the few that I'm probably people will be and think, oh, it's not good. But I pride myself on doing a good Roger Moore impression. So any excuse to throw that in, and then of course I'll see the playback on this and what it sounds in my head and what it sounds to everyone else will be.
Well, if you're not happy with it, that's fine.
Yeah, but we never see anyone do Dalton, do we? Which is unless it's things are about to turn very.
Dalton's quite hard to. He doesn't really have the exaggerations of character that would lend itself to an impression.
No. I mean, he doesn't have. People always do Connery, Moore, Brosnan. I haven't heard any Daniel Craig. No one does George Lazenby. I mean, George Lazenby's got this lovely transatlantic accent, like that you hear on a Majesty's Secret Service, like Tracy kind of thing, or which doesn't sound. It sounded better in my head.
Okay.
But he has that kind of thing. And whereas Dalton, everyone always does that bit where he says to Sanchez, things were about to turn nasty, because it has that slight northern inflection. But
Welsh.
Yeah.
Northern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's yes. So yeah, we've just about come to the end after all of that. And but yeah, it was great discussion, and the time's flown by. So having seen it this week, I take it it's still pretty much your favorite Bond film.
Oh yes, I mean, I watched it with a little trepidation, I have to admit, because it'd been many years since I last watched it, and I thought, well, am I going to watch it again? And I will only like it half as much as before, or heaven forbid, not like it.
Yes.
But from the start, I was so happy. It's like meeting an old friend again. I was so happy all the way through. The great lines, the interpretation of the characters, the plot outline, subplots. Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, it's stronger than ever in number one. It has really stiff opposition with GoldenEye and Casino Royale, but it's got the advantage of being the Bond of my childhood, which those aren't. And I think that's probably what will keep it there. Otherwise, it would be first among equals, which is probably what it ought to be. But it's still number one for me. Precious little that I really didn't like about it. I mentioned Sharky's death. I'm still not sold on the song at the end.
Something out. Let's just touch on that before we finally finish. Me we're getting better because you'll understand why I've been sort of rummaging around for something.
Okay.
I've been poorly organised, and I'll explain in a moment. And I was listening to all what you're saying.
Okay.
The music. I don't like the theme music. Well, I do like again the Gladys Knight's License to Kill. It's good, but I don't think it fits in the film. Reading the sort of film it is, and the one at the end. But Michael Kamen's score throughout, I think Michael Kamen's score is excellent.
Yes, I would agree. I'm okay with Gladys Knight at the beginning.
I like it. I just wonder whether it fits for License to Kill.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't do it any damage.
No,
to be honest. But I'm not. For me, it's not a classic Bond song.
No,
a good one, but not a classic. Not in the first division of Bond music.
No, it's not.
I mean, it's a special song that gets up there. But yeah, the score, Michael Kamen's score, is very good. I agree about that. Yeah, if they couldn't have John Barry, he was a very worthy alternative.
Yes, and I wish he'd have come. There are various reasons of what happened. Not all of it goes with John Barry's fault, but I think as much as I like David Arnold, John Barry should have been round for the Brosnan era, particularly as he was there from the beginning. But that said, all of that, the reason I was looking for some paper, because I'm sort of springing this on you, Malcolm, and I do apologise. Seeing how I thought I'd see how well this discussion went, but would you like us to discuss another Bond film?
Oh, crumbs. Okay.
Not now, obviously, but another time.
Yes, I'd be delighted to, I hope.
What I was going to do is to write name titles of a few Bond films and then do a sort of pick out of a hat.
Yeah.
But
there's a challenge.
I will do is I will mention, because I gave you, and I hope I'm not being too cheeky here, and I apologise if I am, because I gave you choice on License to Kill. I will mention some of my favourite Bond films from each of you, and you pick the one that you think is worth discussing. So
that sounds fair.
Either From Russia with Love, which is my favourite in the Connery era. Used to be your own choice. That's From Russia with Love. On Her Majesty's Secret Service from the George Lazenby one. The Spy Who Loved Me, Roger Moore. The Living Daylights, Timothy Dalton. GoldenEye, Pierce Brosnan. Or Casino Royale with Daniel Craig. Which of those would you want to discuss?
Now, the last two that you mentioned are the easy ones.
Yes.
I watched GoldenEye recently. Casino Royale could probably speak about off the top of my head now, but I'm going to go with because I've watched Dalton, I've watched Brosnan recently.
Yeah.
Let's go back to Connery from Russia with Love. And what I will try and do is read the book as well.
Okay.
I'll read the book and watch the film, and then perhaps talk about it on both levels, or with one with reference to the other.
Yeah.
And that'll be a nice challenge for me because, well, I'd love to have done Living Daylights, GoldenEye, or Casino Royale, but yeah, this will be a little challenge to myself, I think, doing an older Bond film. Yes. And it's only fair that we go to these early classics with Sean Connery as well. So yeah, let's do that.
Okay, From Russia with Love it is. Well, thank you very much, Malcolm. And,
thank you for having me.
And you. And have a good weekend.
Thank you kindly, and you too. And have a good week to anyone watching or who watches.
Absolutely.